Welcome back to another episode of Built and Backed. Joining me today is Manasi Shukla, who is the founder of Safrela Consulting and brings over 20 years of experience designing and implementing customer education and training programs for healthcare organizations. She has trained clinical teams and driven product adoption at industry leaders such as Medtronic and Intuitive Surgical, as well as several innovative startups. Mansi, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
It's my pleasure. I'm very excited to have you since we had originally connected a few months ago. And during our conversation, I was like, I need to have you on my podcast. So it has been a long time coming for this conversation. And I'm really looking forward to it. And so without further ado, I'd love to have you start off by sharing more about who you are and what you do with our listeners.
Oh, absolutely. So I'm a biomedical engineer. Started out working in healthcare in the hospitals and supporting physicians during procedures. This is when I was with Medtronic. And there was something very powerful that I found about how, as I'm working with physicians, about the training that I'm giving them, how when I started working with patients and providing patient education. Then I started working with nursing staff and like educating them on the product. And in all of that, the common thread that I found was that education really changes the way that the product or the service is perceived and how I'm educating them and tailoring the education and the training to that person. So whether it's a surgeon or a patient, it's different. And so like making sure that I'm tailoring it to them and their needs and especially their concerns, it's really impacted in sort of their use and their product adoption. And that kind of got me thinking about, wow, there is power in training and education and like how we deliver the message. Then I went in-house and I was like, I don't want to just be in the field. I actually want to be the one in control of shaping this training. So I worked for Intuitive Surgical. I worked all the way from from sort of product development all the way to sales training, worked in the startup sector, worked with a couple of startups. And then about 4 years ago, started my own consulting business. And I focus on healthcare and I also work in tech because especially in this world that we are in now, remote, where there's remote is like all right, can I start over?
Yeah, go for it.
I'm on that. Let's start. Can you say the question again? Let's start the question again.
Yeah. So it was just about like your background. So you would maybe like start off by picking up about how you had started Safrella 4 years ago. Because I think like up to that point you did a
Okay.
great job explaining it. So you can just talk about like how four
Okay.
years ago you started your
Okay.
company,
Okay.
etc.
Sounds good. All right. Um, all right. 4 years ago, and then I started my consulting business because I really wanted to help companies, especially small to mid-sized businesses, as they're coming on board, once they have this product, really help shape how they're educating their customer on the product and making sure that it's part of their strategy, and it's not an afterthought. And I think there's a lot of power in that based on my experience, over 20 years of experience in what I've seen. And so I really want to empower them and I want to support them. And so that's what I do now in the work with Safrela.
Oh, amazing. And so with that, I know you mentioned you had become your own boss 4 years ago, but did you have almost like an aha moment or something like that that made you realize you wanted to start your own company? I'm curious to hear about how that dream really came about.
So 4 years ago, I was in a little bit of a transition. My family and I were moving to a different city. We had kind of decided to settle roots down here in San Diego. And I had just decided to leave my previous company. They were a wonderful company, but I just wanted to focus on myself and focus on the family. I have young kids, and I really wanted to focus on the transition and just be present for them because it's a big change for everyone, including myself. And once everybody got settled, so I took about 6 months off to just focus on the family. It was time to go back to work. And the thought of just looking for another job just wasn't very exciting. And it's not something that I felt was right for me at that time. I reached out to my network and I said, here I'm available to do work And a friend of mine reached out and he was very plugged into the startup community. And he mentioned, I have a couple of startups that need help with their education and training strategy. Would you want to do it on a consulting basis? And I thought, sure, let me give this a try while I figure out my next step. And I started working with these companies and I absolutely loved it. I loved the work because the companies that I work with every company is doing something different. So I get to learn about a new problem. I get to learn about a new space they're in, get to solve different problems. So every company is at a different stage. And so helping them sort of work through their specific challenges, I found interesting. And I was able to get the flexibility that I needed for myself as well. I really enjoyed that. And so after doing that for about 6 months, I thought, okay, this is perfect. Like, this is what
Yeah.
I want to do. And there's a need for it because the companies, as they're starting out, or even up to, I would say, about Series C, don't necessarily have the budget to hire a full training team. And so for someone hiring someone like me, I have been like, I've done the whole process. And so they can really leverage my expertise. To build out their like their training strategy, work with their teams to be more thoughtful in how they're training their customer, so they can, I can partner with them until they're ready to that point where they can then hire a full team. So I really found a use case, and I thought, okay, this is what I want to do full time.
Yeah, I love that. And you said something earlier that was really good and it felt worth repeating to me, which is education really changes the way that a product or service is perceived, which is so true. And I think that's a really good reminder that you're sharing here for listeners who are founders who are working on building something. And so, with your expertise in customer education and training programs, what exactly might that look like? Like, what are some of the specific, I guess, deliverables that you might provide your clients or certain things that you might work through with them as you help to develop this stuff for them?
No, that's a great question. So sometimes people think, oh, I have like a 1 hour demo and that's the training and it's great and we're get to go. And really, when we think about like sort of this customer education and even like a thoughtful training program, it's more than just a user manual. It's more than just, oh, we're going to do a 1 hour demo. It's really, there's two parts to it. There's sort of internally thinking about are all our teams, and what I mean by that is our engineering, our product, our sales, marketing team, are they aligned in how they're showing up for the customer? Are we supporting them in every phase of the customer journey, from sales all the way to creating a product champion? What are we doing to support them so that they understand the product, right? So it's like more than just, oh, I'm going to do a 1 hour demo after they purchase the product. But what about before? Um,
Mhm.
what's the sales doing? And so is sales communicating with product? Is product communicating with sales? So there's all of these sort of internal team processes that I help bring together. And then the other side of it is for the customer. We want to make sure, like what the way I say it is that there's a common thread, that we've
Mhm.
built out this thread from the customers interested in the product all the way to, oh, we now have someone that's standing at the rooftops and talking about how amazing our product is, and really being thoughtful and actually documenting it in a journey of what does that look like at each stage and how can we support them. And so there's my aspect of, okay, what kind of training can we give them in that sort of part of that journey. But
Mhm.
then it's not always about education. What can sales do? What can marketing do? Everybody has a stake in the customer success. So bringing everybody to the table, a lot of what I do actually is bringing everyone to the table and having that conversation, and then using all of those conversations to build out this training journey so that it is basically more thoughtful in how we're showing up for the customer.
Absolutely. And you brought up a really good point in the fact that this training and education happens even before someone becomes a customer or
Mhm.
user. So, not just when they are a paying customer, but actually when they might be in that discovery phase. And that's a really key point that I'm glad that you mentioned. And so, I'd love to hear more about that, specifically about why it's important to incorporate this piece in more of like the sales process.
Mhm. So I'll give you an example. One of the clients that I worked with, they are a quality management company. So even before their potential customer decided to purchase the product, part of it was sales wanted to go out and showcase, hey, here's what a product does, but not from like a marketing perspective, but from a training perspective. Here's all the modules that we have, here's our features, here's how you use it. So there was this educational component to it. So the sales team came to me and said, well, we want to create a video on educating them on here's our modules and how it can benefit them. And so I worked with the sales team. We built out this video, really thinking about the customer and their profile and what would be important to them. I wrote the script, we did the whole process, built out this video, and then the sales now had this video that they could share with the customer under their tool belt. Having that video became such an asset that every time sales showed them the potential customer video, it was automatically a win because they understood exactly how this video how this product would then help them.
Mhm.
And so that's just one example of how you can really leverage customer education, not just in post sales, but also pre sales as well.
Definitely. And I'd love to hear more about the benefits that startups and founders get from being able to really invest in this education and training. Like, what are the positive outcomes that come from this? And I guess, and along with that, like, what are the perhaps negative repercussions that might come if they don't invest or dedicate the time and energy to having these training and education programs as part of what they do?
So, as a startup, the biggest thing is a product adoption, which then leads to revenue. That's what's
Hmm.
driving everything. That's what VCs are looking at. They really want to see growth. And with having a defined customer education strategy helps with that growth because really what you're doing is you're thinking ahead to what your customer will need. You're anticipating some of the objections, you're anticipating what are the things that they need to learn to become our champion? And then also, let's say they start using the product, they love it, then what?
Hmm.
How are you making sure that as they progress in the use of the product, how are you capturing that? What kind of opportunities are you giving them to make sure that that they become the champion? So all of those things are rolled into having a customer education strategy. And so by working with me, we think about all of those things. So as you're
Hmm.
growing and as you're scaling, we hit all of those points, which increases the product adoption, which then increases revenue, and so as a company, the company becomes more attractive to potential VCs and for more funding in the future.
Totally. And I want to dive deeper into what you mentioned about once you do have customers or users who love your product, like what you do from there, because there's so much talk, which I'm sure you'll agree with, about the fact that it's more important to retain the customers that you have than it is to like go after new customers. And so I would love to hear maybe some examples or suggestions you would give to some startups when it comes to actually being able to, I guess, capture or leverage those happy customers that they have and kind of keep them happy, so to say.
Yeah, so some ideas are things like customer interviews. So reaching out, most companies send out product newsletters, which is just talking about product features. But a few simple things that can be done is if you have someone that's really using the products, they're doing like a customer spotlight, interview them, showcase how they're using it, because every customer, one customer will love to learn from another customer. In healthcare, we do lots of webinars. So that's another way that we've leveraged is we'll host a champion and we'll have them speak about a specific topic, whether it's on the product or maybe just something general about the industry. Doing a speaking engagement if we're doing it in person and having them speak at a conference and things like that. So there's definitely a lot of ways that we can leverage those champions.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And for a startup who has absolutely no like education or training program yet, but know that they need one, what's some advice you would give for them for being able to really get started with this without feeling overwhelmed in the process?
So I always like to start. The basic thing is documentation. So start with something basic like a user manual. Now I know in sort of the digital age you have Confluence and like yeah, you have all of these tools that you can use to sort of document what your product is doing. So start with that. It doesn't matter, whether it's a Google Doc or it's like Confluence but basically documenting here's our product, and here's feature by feature what it's doing. It's different than like, let's say a products requirements document, which, usually engineers will, because that's more feature based. But when I look at a user manual, it's more function based. What is this allowing the user to do? So kind of keeping that hat on and building that out. And what I found, because when I've worked with early stage companies before, is even when we're, let's say, building out this user manual from the customer's perspective, is even like aligning on how are we going to talk about this feature. Yes, we have it, it's great, but what do we want to showcase about it? How do we want to speak about it? Because sometimes what happens is engineering and product and sales are speaking about it very differently.
Mhm.
Or is your software a platform? Is it a tool? Is it like, what is it? Even just that language can differ. And then when you don't have that aligned messaging, then the customer will get confused. So having just start with documentation, like a user manual is great, or a support center, start building out the support center articles, which are, easy to update. So you don't need to do a lot of videos and things like that. So just documenting how the product is working and starting with that and using that as a way to align the teams. And so use that as the basis. And then from that, you can build on that.
Great advice. And I love what you shared about bringing people from all different teams together and not having them operate in silos. So that way, like you shared, the customer or user doesn't get confused when different teams are using different languages or anything like that, or words, whatever it might be. And so, one of the things that I wonder too is that sometimes when you bring together multiple teams, there may be like conflicting opinions or suggestions, or people might have different ideas of how they should kind of go about something a certain way. And so
Mhm.
that's one thing I'd love to hear is how to, or what you'd recommend for getting all the teams kind of on the same page rather than feeling like it's a too many cooks in the kitchen type of situation.
Yeah. So the way that I've done it is I've basically let it, and it's like I take the inputs, but really what we're looking at, what is the best for the customer, and reminding everyone that this is about the customer at the end of the day, and what is the best way to help them learn. And so it's like really going back to the customer profile and their persona. So when everyone comes with a suggestion, we take it and we compare it to the customer persona and go, okay, what you've suggested, will this support who they are? And yes, okay, then that's what we're going to implement. If not, then okay, let's look at something else. And then also metrics. I know we haven't talked about metrics yet. So it's like really, what is the metric that we're trying to achieve? So for example, right now, for the moment, if it's a new company, they really want to look at product, let's say onboarding. So if someone's talking about building a product champion, yes, that's wonderful, but we're not there yet. So let's focus on the challenge that we have, because even with the customer training journey, we can't build everything all. It's nice to have the plan, but we want to focus on one piece at a time. So if we're just focusing on the onboarding metric, let's target all of our efforts and align on that as opposed to worrying about everything else. And so that's kind of how I work to bring everyone together.
Yes, totally. That's a great idea too about making sure that you have those certain goals or benchmarks that you want to reach. And then that way you're intentional with what you're doing.
Exactly.
Um, and I imagine that as the company grows or the startup grows, that those metrics likely change over time. Is that right?
Yeah, yeah. And then the metrics improve over time and you can build on
Mhm.
them. So, for example, initially it could be, like I said, onboarding. We want to get we want to get the onboarding concise, and we want to reduce onboarding time, let's say by, 30%, 20%, 50%. Once onboarding is done, then the next stage is we want to talk about the NPS score. So once they're done onboarding, what are we doing for those users that we already have? What is their feedback, for example, that we're getting? And if you have an NPS score of, let's say, 4 or 5, there's room for improvement. So what can we do? And so it's like really targeting one metric at a time. And then also, for example, one that I work a lot with the customer success team is on support tickets. And so if they're getting a high volume of support tickets, then there's some piece of information that's missing. And so like looking at that and going, okay, well, if, where are they missing? Is it an issue with the product? Is it somewhere along the way that they didn't get the right training? Or was it sales said something and they felt like they weren't getting the value that they thought that they were promised, and so really diving into those support tickets, analyzing what's being said, and then using that and implementing it back into the different functions. And so it's basically like a building block, starting from onboarding and then working your way up.
Absolutely. And what are some things that you think should be prioritized in these like education and training programs? If you had to kind of like pick maybe one or two things that you're like, every single startup has to focus on this, what would it be?
I would say well, first, make it more than just like, oh, one demo. So even think like start with, okay, we actually need some kind of a strategy, like a customer training strategy. So that's the first one. The second is really starting with onboarding, because that's what it comes down to, is once they decide to purchase the product, how are you making sure that they're going to use it? Because you really want to reduce that onboarding time. You want to increase that time to value. So focus on that. I think that's probably the best place to start. And then I think the other thing is, when I speak about onboarding, just really understanding who the customer profile, because not all customers are the same. And so having just one onboarding for everybody across the board, you're not going to get the growth that you're looking for because it's not tailored to what they need. So like also taking the time working with marketing actually to really understand the customer profiles and the personas to see if do you need to segment the onboarding, do you need to segment the market, and how do you support them separately. So like sometimes in the work that I do, especially in healthcare, we talk about onboarding, but I'm like, okay, well, who are we onboarding? If you're
Mhm.
onboarding a physician, it's very different than if we're onboarding a nurse so what are the common features? What's different? And building out separate programs for them. So being very intentional about it.
Yes. And I love that point about making sure that you're always referring back to that customer profile. And it also, with the point that you mentioned earlier too about customer profiles, when it comes to bringing the different teams together, like really going again back to that profile and being like, well, does it fit with this person and what they could really use at this time? Because I think especially as professionals, sometimes we might think we know what the customer is looking for, but that's not always the same as what the customer themselves is actually looking for. And so, kind of like removing that layer, or I guess bias, I guess is the best way to put it, and really thinking about the customer directly is important. And so, I love that you brought that up because it's like always go back to the customer because that's
Exactly.
exactly who you're serving.
Yeah. And generally, marketing has always done a great job at capturing that. And so when I start working with a company, I do leverage that quite a bit. I ask them, what has your marketing team done? Have they looked at the personas? What is even things like, what's the language that you want to use? What's your tone? Because I want to have a consistent message. We do want to carry it all the way into training as well. So I want to show up and create training the way that marketing is showing up, because again, it's to provide that consistent messaging.
Totally. And I'm curious to hear your experience or perspective on how you've seen AI be used successfully as a supplement for education and training programs and how startups can take advantage of that.
So AI, there's a research that's been done in the customer education industry where AI right now is really being leveraged for content development, because it's not sophisticated enough where we can really use it to personalize learning, because personalized learning comes from experience and then also comes from truly understanding the customer. So there is a lot of human element to that. But in terms of content creation, AI is being used increasingly. So, like for example, when I'm creating a video, there's tool like I recently used this company called 11 Labs. They do voiceovers, and it was a great experience. There's other companies like Synthesia that do AI generated videos. So I'm playing around with that to see um, how that works out in the long run. Canva has started integrating AI, so leveraging that. So those are the ways. So I would say mostly in like content creation, and of course like ChatGPT, using it to basically say, here's my script. Can you make this more concise? And so seeing what it comes up with, just so I can get more straight to the point, be more strategic, and about how we're training, like those kind of things.
Oh yeah, I love that suggestion of being able to use it for, like you shared, that content development piece. So that way teams aren't having to spend so much time creating these materials that are really important, but they're kind of having someone, or I guess a tool really to aid them throughout that process. That's a great
Exactly.
idea.
Yeah, yeah.
What's something that you see startups do or not do with their education training programs that you think is a mistake or something that they really should kind of stay away from and that could end up costing them in the long run?
Um, though that's a great question. I think the mistake is really I think it's like the follow-up. I think that's where a lot of startups sort of miss the support. So it's like they'll do the onboarding, they'll do the demo, but then there's no follow-up in terms of how do you continuously provide support. So whether that's like having a support center, whether that's having someone in customer success checking in to make sure that the customer feels supported, what type of education are you giving them sort of post onboarding? I think that's where sometimes companies miss the touch point and so it's kind of making sure that once you've done this training, whatever phase it's in right now, is to have consistently have those touch points, but then also have the support materials that the customer needs to keep them going forward.
Hmm. I love that, especially because I feel like that's something I've experienced of a user as a user of different tools where I'll be using a tool, but like not really know its full capabilities.
Mhm.
And then later I'll hear from someone who's also using that. And they're like, oh, did you know that this tool can do X, Y, and Z? And I'm like,
Exactly.
no, I didn't. And so that is a proof case of why someone like yourself is so important and why it also is important just in general for companies and startups to have these programs so that their users really have the full depth and knowledge of what it is that they're using.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, you bring up a good point, Ashley. It's like when you're using a tool that's new, you don't need to know the expert level features. And let's say you're just starting out and somebody came up to you and was like, oh, here's all the 15 modules and all the things that you can do. It can be very overwhelming. Um,
Totally.
and then to your point, when you start off with the basics, but if they never even told you about the expert level features, then you wouldn't be able to maximize the use. And so, really that's where customer education comes in is we want to gate how we're walking you through the expertise to become an expert in the tool or the product.
Yeah, that's a great reminder. It almost sounds like finding that perfect balance of like not giving them way too many things to show that overwhelms them, but then also not showing them kind of like the bare bones and then them feeling maybe like they're kind of missing out on what they could be
Exactly.
getting
Yeah,
from the tool. So that's a good idea too, is just for these companies being like, what's the right level of support we can show them? And then I imagine there's probably it unlocks different I guess tiers from there on like then once you know A to B, then you go to like C to D and kind of move on.
exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. And I'm curious to hear just from your journey in tech, for anyone who's listening to this episode who might be newer to tech in general, what advice would you give for them for getting started in the industry from what you found has worked well for you?
Uh, I would say talk to people. I think their tech is so big. And even when I was starting out, I did a lot of informational interviews, just especially with LinkedIn. Now it's so wonderful that you can look at people's profiles, you can see the experience that they have, and just reaching out to people and saying, "Oh, I really like this part of the work that you do. Can I pick your brain and talk to you and just learn more about what you're doing day to day?" I think that's a great way to get started and kind of figure out and that's how I actually figured out even my own career path. Like when I started, especially working out as in a biomedical engineer, transitioning into the clinical space, that job didn't exist. But I was very adamant that I wanted to work in healthcare. And I wanted to use technology. And so I just talked to a bunch of people, and that's how I found my first role. And so I think there's a lot of power in networking and talking to people, doing informational interviews.
Yes, that's a great point. I mean, I feel like one of the things that I've always felt like is that we can accomplish so much when we come together, right? Like when you are able to get advice from someone and then in return you can help someone else. I mean, I feel like there's just such like a positive impact that only continues to expand when people come together to network and provide connections and help in any way possible.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And one of my favorite questions to ask our guests is I would love to have you give a shout out to someone in tech who's doing something cool right now. So, could be a founder, VC, another consultant, really anyone who you admire and would like to give some recognition to, feel free.
Yeah, so I actually would like to give a shout out to someone who I met recently, but who's now becoming a friend, and she's fabulous. Her name is Natalie Jackson. She runs her own consulting business as well, and she focuses on the customer journey. So, what she does and why we connected was because she brings the leadership teams together to think about on the high level of how they're going to support the customer, so whether that's, and then she brings together internal teams and also the customer as well. So she's also a wonderful resource in the work that she does.
Amazing. I love it. Monsi, this has been such a fun episode, and I've so enjoyed having you come on the show. And I would love to have you share with the listeners where they can find you online because they'd like to connect.
Yeah, so they can find me on LinkedIn. I'm Manasi Shukla, and then I have a website, safrela.com, so they can reach out to me through there.
Fabulous. And I'll link to those places in the show notes. That way we can easily connect with you. Thank you so much again for coming on this week's episode of Built and Backed.
Oh, thanks for having me.